Now, one of my favorite senators was Senator Tom Coburn. He is a medical doctor, Oklahoma, member of the House, pledged not to serve more than 3 terms, didn't serve more than 3 terms, took some time out, ran for Senate, pledged not to serve more than 2 consecutive terms, did not serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and in fact retired a year or so early. Senator, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Hey, I have considered it an honor to be on your show.
Senator, I know you had some health concerns. How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm great. I didn't leave the Senate because of my health concerns. I left my Senate because you can't fix the problems that are plaguing our country in the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm. You must be pretty pleased with Donald Trump's pick to head up the EPA. He comes from your state.
Absolutely. He's a great man of integrity, man of faith, a bulldog when it comes to the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
So he will do a great job, and I'm sure they're going to try in all sorts of ways. The liberals and socialists in Congress will try to limit his possibilities of being voted on. But he'll get voted on, he'll get in, and he'll actually do some smart stuff for the country that allow us both to grow and also have safe water and clean air.
You must be pleased in general with some of his picks. I mean, we've got a labor secretary who's a CEO of a fast food restaurant and understands the damage done when you hike up minimum wages. You have a secretary of education nominee who's in favor of choice in schools.
Yeah, I think it's all right. I mean, I really believe in markets,
mm-hmm.
and both of those are about markets. And if we actually trust the free market, if we get rid of any crime or any graft in the free market, and we're vigilant, free markets will elevate everybody.
Now, Senator, this Convention of States project that you're involved in, one of the big pushes, of course, is for fiscal restraint. It must have bothered you during this campaign when neither side, whether Hillary or Donald Trump, said very much about entitlement reform, which are really the big drivers behind our deficit and our debt.
Well, they are, and of course, if you want to talk about those things, you got to have solutions. The first thing is the accounting in Washington isn't honest.
Mm-hmm.
The OMB and CBO put out we had a $584 billion with a B deficit last year, but our debt rose $1.4 trillion, and the unfunded liabilities grew $4.4 trillion. So that doesn't fit with generally accepted accounting principles. It doesn't fit with honesty, and it doesn't fit with integrity as far as the next generation, because it would have been far worse had they not borrowed surplus funds from Social Security and Medicare.
Mm-hmm. My guest is former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Senator, if something isn't done, no matter who's president, whether Donald Trump or Hillary, our debt's going to grow.
Our debt will grow, but the debt may not grow. They may do what the Weimar Republic in Germany did and just cancel all the debt that the government owns. And then all of a sudden you have superinflation. You don't have anybody that you can not go back to the markets for 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's happened before. There's a great book called This Time It's Different by Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart, who wrote about the histories of countries that have over 100% debt to the real debt to GDP. And we're far past that. And if you look at total debt, we're at about 280% now, which is twice the real worth of the country.
Mm-hmm. Senator, Donald Trump wants to dramatically cut taxes, which is fine. We've already talked about, we've not heard any serious talk about entitlement reform. And he wants to do this massive, quote, infrastructure investment. I'm old enough to remember when infrastructure investment used to be called pork. Why isn't this really pork?
Well, first of all, I think you need to step back for a minute. There's about $600 billion a year in waste, fraud, and duplication in the federal government. So for the federal government to take and eliminate that and put $100 billion into transportation, whether it's rail, mass transit, or highways, and our highways are certainly hurting, is a good idea. But not only because it's needed, but because it's our money in the first place and should be coming back and shouldn't be spent on federal bureaucrat salaries. So the idea, first of all, there's a real need there. What you have to do is not reinstitute earmarks where congressmen start collecting the IOUs for sending a certain bridge to a certain place in a certain order.
Right.
And so I don't have any problem with that. The question is will they actually cut government spending? And will they live within the realm? And will they transfer authority for lots of things back to the states so that we can actually run them in an efficient way? Nothing in the federal government except losing money is run efficiently.
Well, Congressman, you served 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, and I'm sure you heard over and over again, we're going to go after waste, fraud, and abuse. And waste, fraud, and abuse seems to keep winning the contest.
Well, it does, because all of it has a constituency. And as long as you have career politicians in Washington, they're never going to vote to cut spending on the waste, fraud, and abuse, because all of them have a lobbyist that's there saying, why are you cutting our program? And remember, their job, in their mind, is to get reelected. It's not to do what's best for the country. And so, and that's not all of them. That's a broad brush, but the fact is that's over 85% of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we have to have a convention of states to offer amendments to rebalance the Constitution between the states and the federal government, and rebalance the relationship within the federal government as far as power, and put more of it back into the Congress and less into the executive branch and less into the courts.
And
if you do that, we actually can save our country.
And I assume, Senator, that one of the amendments would be to limit federal spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, with an exception for emergencies, I'm assuming.
Yes, but we don't talk about the specific amendments. We think that state legislators who would go to a convention can figure that out. They're smart. And what we do say is you need to put some restraints on the federal government in terms of spending our kids' future. And let them figure that out. That'd be general accepted accounting principles used with a balanced budget that takes 7 or 8 years to get there, and then some exceptions for times of war or tremendous calamity in the country.
My guest is former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Senator, the Article 5 procedure that allows a convention of the states, walk us through exactly what you want to happen.
Well, what we want to happen is 34 states to say that we need to do this. And so what happens is each state has a joint resolution that they pass in their houses. It doesn't have anything to do with your governor. It doesn't have anything to do with Congress. It has everything to do with states. So if you have 34 states that do that, the Congress is mandated by law to call a convention of states for amendments. And the only amendments that can be considered are within those that are subject to the application that was passed by those 34 states.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very limited range. It's scope and jurisdiction of the federal government, term limits on both appointed and elected officials, and fiscal responsibility so that our future is not impaired for our children. And then what you will see come out of that is a reinstitution of what the Commerce Clause should be. You know, all these EPA rules and Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Interior rules and all the rest of the government operates under the Commerce Clause that was first happened, the real expansion of it, about 20 years after the country was formed, but markedly happened in the 30s under Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
And so now all these federal government agencies, actually the average in every state, Larry, is 60% of the state money that's collected to run the state and local governments has mandates on it from federal bureaucrats telling them what they can and cannot do with it. So if you think about it, the federal government takes our taxes and runs all its business, and then it runs 60% of the business in the states.
So you need 34 states to agree to do this.
Right.
Has any state gone further down the road than others?
Oh, yeah, we have 8 states that have passed. I suspect we'll get 12 to 15, maybe even 20 this year. President-elect Trump has not endorsed it, but he is very favorable towards what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All the other candidates in the Republican primary endorsed what we're doing. So there wasn't anybody that was against what we're doing, and many were strongly for. Marco Rubio was out in front, Ted Cruz, and John Kasich. All were out there they know we need to do this. And Jeb Bush has come on board and is helping us. So everybody understands what we have in terms of federal government is nowhere close to what our founders intended,
mm-hmm.
nowhere close that will preserve liberty as well as opportunity for our kids. Remember, we're the 15th state, the 15th country out of the world in terms of economic freedoms today. We've led the world for 50 years before that, and now we're 15th. And so we ought to be asking the question, why are we 15th in terms of economic freedom? It's because we have a big government that consumes a large amount of our GDP, but more importantly, limits our freedom and limits our economic opportunity.
Senator, I'm sure you know this. In 1900, at all three levels, government took less than 10% from the American people. Today, it's about 35%, and when you put a price on so-called mandates or regulations from Washington, D.C., it's over 50%.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I understand that well.
Mm-hmm.
I left the Senate because I was tired of pushing boulders up an ice floe. When you can get senators to tell you, yeah, Coburn, you're right, this stuff is all waste, fraud, and abuse, but we can't vote for it, getting rid of it. So that told me is we got to do it a different way. And the citizens, we the people, are the people that have to go and take our power back. We have to bring back our freedom. We have to bring back our liberty. We have to restore our economic opportunity. We have to quit undermining self-responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Senator, I've often heard the expression, don't cut you, don't cut me, cut the other fellow behind the tree. Do you really believe the American people, despite what they say, are interested in having a truly limited government, or have people become so dependent and so reliant on these programs, special interests, all sorts of other goodies, that deep down inside, the American people collectively do not want government reduced to the size that you and I would like it to be reduced to?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I think the last election was a good indicator that people have had enough with the status quo, and that we want our freedom back. We want the constitutional responsibility of the federal government limited, and if we're going to be dependent, let's make it dependency in our states. If we're going to foster dependency and lack of effort and lack of ethic, then let's do it at the state level where we can actually have some control on it.
Doctor, did you ever think that you'd live in a country where government could compel somebody to buy a product, in this case medical insurance, whether they wanted it, whether they could afford it, whether they needed it?
No, I didn't. But it just tells you what's gone wrong in terms of what our founders' vision was. We are compelled now because one judge decided that was the case. One person out of 330 million people decided that was the case. It wasn't what was intended in the law.
Right.
But that was the case. So what that tells you is we've gone far upstream from the supposed balance of power between the three branches of Congress. For example, if you wanted to limit scope and jurisdiction, you could say when you have a Supreme Court ruling like that, if 30 states say that's not right, it's not right. So when you have judges who supposedly in their expert wisdom abandon all the knowledge of our founders in terms of historical, brand new ideas to give people real liberty, and they abandon it, then the states can say, well, wait a minute. It isn't a tax. It was a fee. You're calling it a tax so they can have their way. And so the whole thing is we've lost our way. Entitlements is a big problem. And both sides are totally guilty. And a great example is Bush running in 2004. They passed Medicare Part D. It's a $14 trillion unfunded liability on our children. Mm-hmm. There was no revenue passed to pay for it, but they did it so it would not be a topic of the election.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong. If in fact you think the federal government ought to be in charge of all the health care, that's fine. But if in fact you actually think, if we go back and we look at outcomes, we look at cost per visit, we look at all the wasted dollars that are going towards end-of-life care that shouldn't be there if people were actually making the decisions, that wouldn't be there. And I'm not talking about euthanasia. I'm talking about real economics and smarts as we approach health care like we would any other aspect of our society. So, and then you have Social Security. If you want to have a Social Security program like they started, where the retirement age was, 2 years earlier than the benefit age when they first planned this thing.
Right.
You have to, if you're going to keep that going, you have to at least be responsible, so you're going to have to pay for it, instead of transferring that to your grandchildren. And so it's the career politicians. They're not going to do what is in the best long-term interest of our country. They're going to do what's in the best long-term interest of their political career. And that's why you absolutely need to have term limits.
We've had term limits, Senator, in California for a couple of decades now. The state is more fiscally irresponsible than it was before.
Well, but who's controlling your state?
Well, the voters
When's the last time you had a Republican legislature in California?
We haven't, but the voters are the ones who voted on. My point, Senator, is it seems to me we need to have reform in the minds of our citizens who are voting people who are expanding government, spending more and more money, putting on more and more debt. And you can throw out the politicians that have simply abided by the will of the people, but as long as you have left-wing people like we have in California that want to spend, and tax rich people, it seems to me term limits is not going to do any good.
Well, that's why you can't just do one thing. It's just like a balanced budget amendment won't fix the federal government. Unless you have a combination of limiting terms, limiting the fiscal irresponsibility, and limiting the scope and jurisdiction, it won't do any good. But you got to have all three. Mm-hmm. And I'm for a balanced budget amendment. I'm for limiting scope and jurisdiction, and I'm for term limits because what I've seen is the young people who come in and the new people who come in and the people who've actually had a job outside of politics actually make really good decisions. The ones that haven't had that and have been in political, and I don't know this to be fact, but I bet you if you went and surveyed most of California's legislature, that they're career politicians.
My guest is former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Senator, let's talk about sanctuary cities and how it would work with the federal government and the states. We want to return power to the states and localities. Donald Trump says he wants to get rid of sanctuary cities. You have a number of mayors, Chicago, L.A., and New York, all saying that we are sanctuary cities. The Chicago mayor even used
that they're career politicians.
My guest is former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Senator, let's talk about sanctuary cities and how it would work with the federal government and the states. We want to return power to the states and localities. Donald Trump says he wants to get rid of sanctuary cities. You have a number of mayors, Chicago, L.A., and New York, all saying that we are sanctuary cities. The Chicago mayor even used the term sanctuary cities, and we're not going to change. So can you force the local government to do what the federal government wants in terms of deporting the kinds of people that Donald Trump wants to deport, and he's prioritized them to get the vicious criminals out at first and deal with the others later on?
It comes back down to the rule of law. The rule of law has been ignored in the Obama administration. Whether it's been enforcement of the border, enforcement of tons of other things through the Justice Department, turning a blind eye to marijuana, for example. Mm-hmm. You know, it's still illegal federally to grow and smoke marijuana. So are we going to enforce it or not? So the point has to be is if they want to be a sanctuary city, you take them to court and say you can't do this, and here's the consequences if you don't, mm-hmm. and let them suffer the consequences. Chicago is totally dependent on federal money.
So, Senator, so the analogy might be when, for example, Governor George Wallace of Alabama stood in front of the school door and said segregation forever, and the federal marshals came in. Same thing with the governor of Arkansas.
Right, the troops came in.
Right.
Eisenhower sent the troops in.
Right.
And so they can. And so in terms of human rights, we have to have that portion of our central government to be strong. But when it comes to managing our daily lives, we need them to be weak. Remember, the best government is the smallest government there is.
Senator, where can people get more information on this convention that we are talking about?
Conventionofstates.com. You can find out everything about it, every state that's passed it already, what the consequences will be. We had a wonderful mock convention in Williamsburg.
Conventionofstates.com. Senator, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Larry, God bless you.
God bless you.
You have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to the country that the people of the United States of America are ready to hold the first Article 5 convention in the history of this country. I congratulate you, I salute you, and may God bless you. Thank you very much.